Welcome to the PGN Podcast. With this podcast, we're looking to normalize the conversation around flooding. What happens behind the scenes, lifting the curtains on the mystery that can sometimes come into play when you're either involved with flooding or trying to protect your home. We're talking to some experts in the industry and relaying some of the experiences we heard from some communities. Hopefully, after our series, you'll have a bit more information to help yourself or help others in an emergency where flooding is involved.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the PGN Podcast with myself, Carl, and Meshi.
Hello.
So today we've got a really interesting topic, about adaptation and nature-based solutions. Basically, it's about how we can use nature and the natural environment to help us understand or react to the environmental changes that are happening in the world, particularly in relation to climate change. So as we move towards a future of adaptation is very important, but also understanding that when we are building flood schemes or creating solutions to flooding, we need to start including amenity and biodiversity and ecology as part of these solutions. So giving a lot more social value to the projects that we hope to deliver to reduce the risk of flooding. So we are going to talk about what that looks like, and particularly in regards to nature-based solutions as well.
So before we delve in, let's meet our guest. Hi, Helen.
Hiya.
Hi. So Hellen Hornby, Program Manager, Groundworks Northeast. Tell us about you, a bit more about your background.
Well, I've been working for Groundwork for approximately 4 years, I think, just before COVID, of course. And yeah, I've been involved in environmental conservation work pretty much all my life, from when I was a nipper doing watch-based kind of tree planting activities to kind of, managing bigger programs for estuary restoration. So I've always had a love of the environment and always wanted to kind of contribute and help. And my career has kind of just followed that, really. So I'm currently responsible for managing a program of estuary and river-based restoration projects across the northeast. So revitalising our estuaries and also the Tyne Estuary Partnership, which is obviously very relevant as we've managed to deliver some projects in the Gateshead area.
So what are nature-based solutions? Give us the basic, fundamentals.
So, people probably have come across sort of nature-based solutions. A lot of people are aware of the fact that, if you tree plant up in, the upper catchments, up in the hills on smaller rivers and tributaries of a bigger system like the Tyne, then you can slow the flow of water and help to prevent flooding downstream. So that's a nature-based solution. So it's kind of an action that we can deliver in an area which has an ecological benefit, a restoration potential, can sustainably manage land, but also provides that social benefit as well. So a lot of people link it to flooding, but it can provide other kind of societal benefits as well. Anything from water quality improvements to sort of climate change mitigation.
Yeah, and what does it look like in an urban area compared to a rural area? Are there any differences between nature-based solutions in those settings?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously my primary focus and through the work of the Estuaries Partnerships is around kind of looking at urban, heavily modified water bodies. So you talk about the Tyne, the Wear, the Tees, none of them look like they did hundreds of years ago. And obviously there's not much that we can do to create vast spaces for nature. So if you go into the upper catchment of the Tyne, obviously, you get very rural. There's scope and scale potentially for doing bigger schemes that have a bigger impact. Whereas if you're in a very urban area, you've got very small pockets where you can potentially deliver those schemes. So, you might look at peatland restoration for re-wetting ground, so that, it becomes that carbon sink so that it helps mitigate against climate change, or, the flood relief aspects of that as well. But, you get further down the catchment and obviously you can't do that. So with the Tyne Estuary Partnership and the estuaries work that Groundwork does, it's about, in a lot of cases, kind of retrofitting.
Yeah.
And trying to find that space for nature.
And I think that's the key element of this, retrofitting, particularly in urban areas where you are only limited to so much land and there's a demand and a need for that land to be used. So, where we might want to put a flood mitigation feature, someone else might want to put a pocket park or a cycle infrastructure or something like that. And I think nature-based solutions is a great way where we can incorporate flood risk into urban design. But you mentioned there about the what happens upstream. So one example I would have here is the when I've been working with the Environment Agency in the past, there was a natural flood management scheme in somewhere upstream of the River Team, so Headley Hall, I think it was, and how explaining to someone in Team Valley who's flooded that we're going to plant something 3-4 miles upstream, obviously Groundworks has had experience in that. How do you do that sell? How do you explain to people that because we're not putting something on the doorstep, how is that a benefit?
Can I break that down a bit further? Because we've been talking about catchments and upstream, and I think let's start with those words. How would you describe the term catchment and upstream to a resident if you were starting that conversation from scratch?
So, I mean, the catchment of the Tyne, I would say, is the tributaries, so the smaller streams that flow into the Tyne, and the land that is around those. So when the rain falls on those hills and those, the land around, all that water is heading down into a river that will then eventually end up in the Tyne and end up out in the North Sea. So you'll have a different catchment for the Coquette, and you'll have a different catchment for the Tees, because that water naturally falls and goes into those streams that head in. So when I think about catchment, that's so obviously it's huge. It can be huge. And in terms of kind of what sort of, the impact that might have on a different community and communities downstream and what upstream is, again, it depends on your river system, because the Tyne is quite long and quite stretched, and obviously, it varies in its nature. The estuary section here is very straight and canalised. You get up into the upper catchments, and you're talking, small burns, small, streams, becks, dikes, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And they have a very different nature, different ecology, and different, sort of geomorphology. So
the visualization and getting more people to understand that all these waterway systems essentially interconnected.
Yes.
And we talk about the fact that water goes downhill, but that's what we refer to as a catchment, is that natural network that goes from the uplands to the lower lying areas, and then the exit, which is your drainage outlet, should we say. And so, yes, part of the challenges I've found is when you're explaining to somebody that actually doing a solution upstream, so in the higher areas, could bring them benefit. There's a challenge in visualizing how doing something completely remote from them can help them.
Yeah.
And it's how we can, because part of the challenge with nature-based solutions is getting people to buy into nature-based solutions, and how we can transform how we communicate around what they are and how they work and how they interact, how we can transform that messaging to get more communities and more people that don't work in this space all the time on board with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's evidence and examples. You know what I mean? It's you kind of, it's not just the people downstream who might have struggle understanding the concept and how it will sort of benefit them and reduce their flood risk. It's about the landowners as well and getting them on board, because you're talking huge areas where it might be owned by one farmer, it might be owned by 10 tenant farmers, and you need them to understand. If you're gonna do something crazy like we introduce beavers, not that it is that crazy, but that's a big step for landowners and land managers, and how that kind of but obviously it's been done elsewhere now, so you can draw on all that evidence and information.
And I think from me, from sort of a capital project management side, I feel it's always very, very hard to demonstrate economically those benefits. Things like carbon capture and wider ecological benefits that aren't necessarily captured on that economic appraisal that you have to do as part of that project. And I think that's something we need to, as an industry, we need to bottom out a bit more. And, I know obviously things that have been done in Calderdale, Slough, Flow, etc. are proven to be good national examples as well. So I think that's a really positive, response to the natural flood management approach as well.
I mean, that's the second time you said natural flood management. So we're going to kind of tackle that conversation. So nature-based solution come in a wide range of options, don't you? So natural flood management, NFM, is a term we keep hearing a lot at the moment. It's all over the place. Could you talk us through what NFM is and how that sits in the space of nature-based solutions?
I mean, I must admit, Meshi, kind of, as I've said, kind of my focus tends to be on the estuaries and the downstream sections. But, it's similar, isn't it, in that it's a measure that's installed to reduce flood risk and manage flood waters. Yeah. I guess whether it's surface water or whether it's fluvial or, is it's all included. Yeah. So if you talk about leaky dams, on streams up, where it just kind of, it blocks the stream slightly, lets water through at a slow rate, and then, that eases pressure on downstream areas where there might be a sort of narrowing or a kind of flash flood point and can just kind of manage that.
Yeah, slowing the flow essentially.
And I think as well, when you've referenced about things like leaky dams and planting, etc., it's something we've said people don't understand the value of that downstream. Mm-hmm. There's one really good educational tool in the region that I'd just like to point out to people, which is if you go to the Sill, which is near where Sycamore Gap was, there's a very good exhibition on there that just basically tells you about the land, Northumbria, the landscape, etc. But it's also got an interactive screen that says, can you stop the village from flooding? And it's got, do you want to canalise the river through the village, or do you want to put planters, leaky dams, etc. in? And it shows you the value of putting these smaller measures in, and that interactive module is really good. So I just thought I'd kind of point that out to the listeners. If you want to play our jobs for a little bit, go to the Sill and have a go.
Quite exciting, interactive.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. Yeah.
But again, that's only part of what is a bigger conversation, though. I know when we first met Helen, we were talking about grey-blue infrastructure and how they then link in with the traditional blue, green and grey systems. And these are all terms that we kind of use all the time in between conversations. And I thought it'd be really good if we start by just setting the scene on what these different terms mean. Grey systems, I think, Carl and I are very familiar with those systems. Our traditional piped systems, I think overwhelmingly urbanized areas, it's what we rely on predominantly for drainage. Yeah,
the engineered drainage network.
The engineered drainage network. But again, historically and actually currently very carbon intensive. Yeah. Heavily reliant on manufactured products, concrete and plastics and whatever.
And of course you only work to a certain return period, to a certain rainfall rate, and
limited capacity.
Yeah, they've got limited capacity, and then of course as soon as that starts to exceed its capacity, that water just follows that mimics that natural flow path as much as possible, obviously going across roads or highways. Just basically water goes downhill from that point.
And not as dynamic and flexible in how they respond to unforeseen volumes of things. And I think that's where nature-based solutions, because it's more aligned with the natural behaviors of what would, I guess, exist normally. So restoring some of these habitats and things like that perform a function as well as the benefits of biodiversity, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, they have those biodiversity benefits, but they have benefits for us as well as people, know, and, I would rather live next to, an urban park that was used, occasionally as flood storage, than a big wall that kept us away from the water's edge and kept us away from viewing anything that was happening in the river. So, when you talk about kind of quantifying the benefits and the value of installing these things, it's that aspect of it as well that we need to consider, and keeping people connected with those systems and not just pushing them and hiding them out of the way.
I was on a panel some time back, and we were having a conversation about how you quantify and measure the value in monetary sense? How do you put that on paper in such a way that the current metrics for funding and everything else can recognize? And I had a bit of a cheeky response. I said, stop trying to make nature fit into your mold. The solution is to change how you value it. So as far as I'm concerned, the environment and nature is there first. And what we need to do is learn to live better with our environment and our nature. And actually that also goes down to revisiting the system. So the solution is not making it fit the system, is adapting the system to recognize the value of it.
Yeah.
And perhaps I'm being naive in that sense, but I truly believe that if we're talking about sustainability and resilience for the future, in a climate change future where essentially nature is more and more taking over, we can no longer keep it in the boxes that we've put it in. We can no longer rely on those pipe systems to save the day. We need to work with nature.
Yeah, because some of those pipe systems are over 100 years old, and we're living a different climate now. We're getting more intense, less frequent rainfall events, and we are much more urbanized than when those systems were first built. So instead of a lot of water going into the ground or into natural streams, those streams have now been piped over.
And it's also kind of our legacy catching up with us, mostly because of development. And water would do what it does best, which is return to its natural pathways. And now we have to learn how to integrate them better, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think humans generally are very capable of doing that thing. It's just whether there's the will and the pressure. And I think, unless you have legislation that drives that on the whole, it doesn't happen. I mean, this is where biodiversity net gain comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's because when that does come into force, that will mean that there is investment, in putting back some of the space for nature that's lost through development. And obviously we haven't had that,
It's about linking the different parts. Flood risk, we have flood risk, an act in place that looks after flood risk management. And that's kind of like, it has its own little space.
Yeah.
And then I think when you look at developments and planning, it has its own little space. We talk about how all these systems are linked and why we still ultimately working in separate spaces. Yeah. Nature-based solutions, you're right, multifunctional. Yes, we're talking about flood risk management because this is predominantly about flood risk management. But what this conversation is showing us is that you can have multiple benefits, and one of them being flood risk management. And it's almost like you're expecting to kind of deliver using one hat and then go, well, that's nice to have, as opposed to saying they're equally important and should have the same level of focus and priority.
Yeah. I mean, it might be partly kind of sort of funding related, isn't it? In that, if I don't know what it's like within local authorities, but, you obtain funding to deliver a certain scheme that ticks boxes, and those boxes might be biodiversity, or they might be flood relief, or they might be, kind of social impact and ecology and that kind of thing. It's very rare that you get something that kind of does all three. So you create and design a program to meet, or to, you think, all right, that'll go for that one.
Yeah.
But if it was a bit broader and a bit more thingy, you could potentially go. I mean, I don't know if, departments are separated out in terms of their funding, the same sort of way. But
and I think internally as local authorities, we work to capital schemes that better protect properties, residential properties, and we get a lot more funding for better protecting homes than we do for better protecting businesses. But there is still an economic cost when a business floods out. People can be out of work. Data records can be lost, damaged, and things like that. So there are other tangible costs. And then as this funding process has moved on, as it's evolved since 2012 or whenever it started, there's more play on that, but also mental health as well. That's another key part. And then there's the outcome measure 4 of the FDGIA flood defence grant and aid process, which looks at environmental benefits. So you can get money now for wetland habitat created or water course, by kilometre of improvement, etc. So there is now a steer on that, but it's still not as proportionate to the properties, I don't feel, where it's not encouraging it. So hopefully, obviously there's other funding streams for things like nature-based solutions, come and go, similar to schools as well. So it feels like there are side pots that we can bring together, but I think one of the problems is these side pots only come at certain times, so we need to almost have shovel-ready schemes to say, right, well, this funding pot's around, we've got a scheme here next to a school where we can create wetland habitat, we can grab from 2 other pots, and we've got a very good scheme.
I mean, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to have, is there, a kind of, a piece of land adjacent to a water body that can flood at times when it's needed, but other times provide that recreational kind of, opportunity for people who live nearby, and provide that kind of flood resilience for the homes and businesses that are nearby.
I feel it in the region, some areas, open space is so limited, it's got to have multiple uses, it's got to have multiple benefits. And I think that's a key element of nature-based solutions, definitely.
But it's the planning thing is a good area to look at as part of proposals for development, and especially with Schedule 3 and SODS adoption. But in the northeast, the LLFAs, the Lead Local Flood Authorities, that had a kind of a standard, a region standard, which looked at the implementation of SODS as part of the development plan and the drainage strategy. But also in there, they were looking for things around water quality and biodiversity.
Yeah.
If these systems, which are all working towards the same goal, is all around a more secure and sustainable future, if they were better linked, if they fed better into each other, then just like the NIDP and that partnership, you get more value across the board. Everyone gets more value.
Yes.
Isn't it?
I mean, we are finding, I think, more and more now that, certainly the sort of, larger enterprises that might be based around the Tyne or wherever, they're the ones who are looking at their environmental impact and their carbon footprint, and not necessarily coming at it because they have to, but from an ESG angle, and looking at investing in their local area. If they have an impact and their presence in the local area like the Tyne, if there is a scheme that they can contribute to, then we're finding that we're, getting a lot more inquiries along that line now. And the good thing about a lot of the work that we do with the Tyne Estuary Partnership and the Estuaries Programme across the North East is that, some of the schemes are relatively simple and easy to retrofit, So you can create, if you've got a sheet piled, dock wall, then you can add these, magnetic vertipools, that are cheap and effective and provide intertidal habitat, and if you looked at the whole length of the Tyne and the amount of hard engineered structures that we have, it's a fairly simple thing to do. But if you get new developments, then why not include that in your planning as part of it anyhow?
So can you talk us through the Tyne Estuary Partnership? Obviously, been a number of projects around the region. So can you just give us a flavour of what that could look like, nature-based solutions in real life, using that as an example?
Yeah, so we started the Tyne Estuary Partnership in 2019, working with the Environment Agency and trying to mitigate against the heavily modified water body status. So basically it just means that, there is a lot of man-made structures in the Tyne, and that obviously that has an impact on its ecology, on its function. And we were asked to kind of bring sort of key strategic partners together to discuss how we might install some nature-based solutions that would kind of improve the Tyne Estuary. So we started off with seed funding from the Environment Agency, and we've been able to build on that and bring in additional match funding to deliver capital schemes. So we had the University of Hull come along and basically look at the whole of the Tyne Estuary, so from Wrighton and Newburn all the way down to the mouth, and identify places where we could potentially install some nature-based solutions. And we've been able to deliver 6 or 7 of those projects now. So our first one, as you said, was a floating ecosystem at Royal Keys Marina. And we've got another one now that's just gone in on the Tyne at Newcastle Quayside. And these are, really good. They don't obviously mitigate against flood impacts, but if you think of climate change and the fact that sea levels are rising, obviously in a built environment, you don't have that flexibility in the bank side. So you get the coastal squeeze.
Yeah, and I think as well, these features when they're installed, they look quite small. But when you add them all together, when you start putting, 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 of them together, you really start to see those environmental benefits. And it's the same, I think, with nature-based solutions in green blue infrastructure, as it were. For example, if you put it through town or city centre, 9 or 10 stormwater planters, rain gardens, some green roofs, some green walls, they all add up, and it's not just in those peak events to better protect properties, but every time it rains, that water is going into absorption, there's carbon sequestration there, and the society's getting a benefit from it all every time it rains, in essence. And I think that's an important thing we really need to stress as part of this.
And I mean, don't they say as well that kind of footfall and purchasing, the actual economic benefit of having a green high street, you get more people going to high streets that are green with trees and with what. And
then come July, when it's too hot, it cools as well. So there's benefits both ways. But as well, of course, if that water is being absorbed by plants and not going into the grey, the engineered sewer system, the engineered water cycle, it doesn't have to go through that treatment process. So you're reducing your carbon impacts.
You're reducing energy demands.
And reducing the risk of CSO spills as well. And I think that there are multiple benefits to nature-based solutions and green blue infrastructure, both in urban and rural areas.
Yeah. I mean, we've always kind of, well, me personally, I should say, I've always kind of considered the Tyne Estuary Partnership to be, take that kind of string of pearls sort of approach. In that, we haven't got scope for a huge project, to create, a big sort of flood realignment scheme or anything like that. But we have got pockets where we can create new salt marsh, or we can install intertidal habitat, and if we can do that in patches along the estuary, then
absolutely. And I think if you think of Tyneside in relation to the River Tyne and the river, the risk of flooding from that river, not many people understand that the key risk there is tidal flooding. And we often get queries about why don't you dredge the River Tyne, and again, that's something we can't. It won't make a difference. You know what I mean? To the tide level going up and down, you're just creating a deeper channel.
But also, it's the negative impact it has.
The ecological impact, and also the sustainability of it, because it won't last long. Not with the amount of fluvial matter that's coming down, not with the amount that's brought in by the tides. So it wouldn't last that long. But obviously, kind of the sediment issue is a problem, obviously, on the Tyne, and economically, it stopped the tall ships from coming up the river. So, but that again is another aspect of the catchment-wide approach, and looking at where that sediment is coming from, and can you do work with not primarily blaming farmers, but kind of on agricultural land where there's a lot of runoff and all of that sediment, and also potential pollutants are entering the water as well. And if you can prevent poaching and that kind of thing of it, up in the catchment, then potentially you can reduce the amount of sediment entering the Tyne itself.
What about some other challenges, though? Because we've already talked about, I guess, you've touched on funding and being able to secure funding and legislation, which you've referenced that already. Maintenance. What does that look like? Because I think a lot of these obviously tend to be in, say, private, for you, waterways, but from the lens of a landowners, or what is the biggest challenge when we look at long-term maintenance?
So I mean, Groundwork, obviously, as a charitable trust, we've obtained funding to deliver these capital schemes to create these improvements. What those grants often don't do is provide the long-term management, but they often do stipulate that you have a method of doing that.
Yes.
And so as a trust, we don't own land, we're not like the wildlife trusts, and we don't have nature reserves. So we do rely on that, third party landowner engagement and having to have a management agreement with those. And yes, given, the state of the economy at the minute and local authority budgets, it's very difficult if you say that you're going to put in a floating ecosystem that needs X amount of maintenance over 3, 5, 10 years to get that agreement in place. Nobody wants to do that. Again, one of the things with biodiversity net gain is that might help mitigate against some of those issues, because anybody requiring offset will then be required to maintain it for 30 years. So that hopefully will get round, but only if you can demonstrate, and you've really got the baseline data to show that your site is delivering that uplift. So it's always an issue. There's not many funders out there who are willing to support, and also it's not just the maintenance, it's the monitoring that we find as well. Everybody wants to know, like you said, how do we measure these benefits? Everybody wants to know. Well, one of the questions we got asked when we put in the floating ecosystem was, well, what will the water quality benefit be? I was like, well, if that one thing on its own, probably very small, but if we could do the whole quayside, we probably would. But without funding to measure that, and the equipment and the resources behind it, you don't get that data. So how can you prove what people are wanting you to show? And we know that it will have an effect. No,
I think as well, just to go back a little bit, you use the acronym ESG, which I assume is environmental and sustainability gains. Is that right?
Environmental, social governance, I think.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So building on that, I think, as putting projects together, it's normally public contributions and potentially private contributions from, say, Northumbrian Water to bring that scheme together. But what I've noticed engaging more with businesses is they're having sustainability strategies and sustainability policies. Carbon offsetting is very important to a lot of businesses. How do we work with these businesses to encourage nature-based solutions?
So what we're trying to do at the minute through, again, it's another project that we've got going that's funded by DEFRA, so it's investment readiness funding, and we're looking at how we can measure and quantify the benefits of all of the estuaries work that we're doing. So can we show, that by putting in, a salt marsh scheme in Gateshead or Hebburn or wherever, that has a biodiversity uplift of X amount. If we can demonstrate that, then we can potentially put those figures into a metric and calculate a carbon unit and then offer that for sale. So whether that's the landowner who gets those benefits or whether it's the buyer, that's a negotiation that needs to take place elsewhere. But there's opportunities there now that are coming out because, as you say, there's a requirement. But a lot of companies are, like I say, kind of not looking at it to buy carbon units to directly offset their carbon footprint. They are looking just to invest, in the local area. So we have got, a couple of corporations who supported us recently through the estuaries work. They have a big presence in the northeast, and therefore they want to contribute to, improving the environment in their area, and they're quite happy to. Still a lot of reporting. To do. But
they're big long-term projects as well that can really shape and improve our water courses. And I think with that, obviously, valuing the work you do with the estuary partnerships and the Tyne Rivers Trust, for example, in the Tyneside area, and that's replicated against other catchments in the region as well. And I think it's really positive. And I think with flood risk, people are so focused on water quantity, where that water goes, but don't understand the other value of water and those kind of side benefits of schemes as well.
Water, the resource, and and the other opportunities, because we'll talk about health and well-being. The ecosystem in which we live in is so crucial to our personal health and well-being, and all these conversations about biodiversity all provide positive benefits to how we live.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to COVID when we were all trapped in our houses and we couldn't really go anywhere. One of the things was really apparent was once, the rules were relaxed and we could get out again, how many of us flocked to our parklands, flocked to our rivers, flocked to the coast, especially because we were desperate for that kind of open space and that connection with rivers and water. And I think, obviously a lot of people perhaps don't feel like that, but a lot of people do. And, if these projects can improve these blue-green spaces that are on the doorstep of people, they don't have to get in a car and walk there. They don't have to, have, a lot of money behind them or anything like that. They can go to their local green space if that's really nicely managed and it connects in well with the river and there's activities and engagement opportunities there. Then, you can kind of really make a difference in where people live.
We've got one final question, and this is around the future. So obviously we've had a lot of chat about funding and legislation, and I think the maintenance problem, long-term maintenance. And I think one of the biggest things around the climate change future is we need solutions that are sustainable. So not just for the next 10, 20 years. Predict something disruptive, transformative that could essentially take nature-based solutions from here, really good idea, to nature-based solutions, the leader when it comes to a sustainable future. What would that be?
I don't know really. I mean, I think kind of if you could include, you know, a requirement to I mean, not in every scheme, obviously, but, you know, to build in. I mean, SUDS, for instance, is one of those ones that has gone that way now, isn't it? In that, you know, you are, I don't know if you're required to implement a SUD scheme for any urban development, but, you know, they are generally well used these days.
Yeah.
And to include, you know, the stuff that we're doing on the Tyne Estuary Partnership across the North East is quite new, and there's lots of innovations out there that are coming out, and it's kind of, can we kind of react a bit quicker to get those kind of, I don't know, options integrated into planning.
Yeah.
So we found where we have got, you know, in South Tyneside, we've worked with the local authority there, and we found that, you know, they've been really good and really proactive, and kind of like, you know, where there's a planning application that's gone in that is next to the estuary, they've said, all right, well, we could do this and we could do that and we could do that. And if you kind of, if we can integrate those messages more into the planning system and the planning officers and get them to kind of think, right, yes, this is a really good way to go, then I think we can make a lot of, urban changes.
I think to build on what you've mentioned there about sustainable drainage, particularly on new developments, Flood and Water Management Act Schedule 3 is being enacted, hopefully, which will make it an integral part of the planning process, in essence. But as well, you know, with regards to biodiversity net gain and the fact that the sustainable drainage, where all of that surface water generated on site has to be managed on the site and discharged at a pre-agreed rate, you know, you can integrate those two things together and you can create a nicer place that people would have value in. And I think when people understand that value, A, it's protecting their homes from flooding, but B, there's ecological environmental value, you'd hope they would buy into that socially and basically become advocates of those assets.
I'm with Helen though, I think, if it's more mandatory. Point is, whenever things are being enforced on a kind of a mandatory basis, as a byproduct, they also become a kind of a social norm.
Yeah.
Like, I can barely remember when people used to smoke inside, but there was a time when that was the norm, and then it became enforceable that you couldn't do it. And now, if someone even suggested it, you might not say something, but there'll be a look of horror on your face. And it's things like that.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, SUDS was there 20, 25 years ago, but it was in tanks under the ground, you know, and you'd get it through an agreement with Northumbrian Water. But now, you know, as I said, spend your pound twice, you know, have somewhere to store water, but have somewhere where we're getting environmental benefits as well.
And social, I mean, like the big scheme that they did in Sheffield with that lovely SUD screen, Greater Green. Yeah, you know, my old office used to be right next door to it. And it used to be lovely, you know, instead of going out onto concrete kind of footpaths.
I mean, I was at university in Sheffield over 20 years ago now. And, you know, that part of the city was never, it was somewhere you wouldn't go, basically. And now, you know, I went down there with, and had a tour with some consultants that work down there. And, you know, the social space that's opened up of what used to be a basically, you know, heavy engineering and factories, warehouses. Now, you know, you walk through there and there's people sitting there in pocket parks having a sandwich for their lunch. You know, and again, that's there day to day as a nice park, but when it rains, that's there to capture water as well.
Yeah, and it provides biodiversity benefits, doesn't it? Because, you know,
I think we'll leave it there. It's like, phew, we just blink and the conversation's flown through. But thank you so much, Helen. It's been brilliant having you. And I mean, if you want to find out more about nature-based solutions, speak to Helen.
Yeah,
thanks,
brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the PGN podcast today. We hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast. But also, please, if you find this useful to anyone else, pass it on and spread the word.
To find out more about Project Groundwater Northumbria, please visit www.pgn.org.uk.